Hey, what's up with it, guys? Hey, welcome back to another video. Now, I wanted to go ahead and make this video showing you guys just an alternative build. Now, I covered in the last couple videos the demonic consumption build that I think you guys are probably all pretty familiar with if you're playing Demonology at all. This is, I would say, like the go-to build that everyone's kind of been saying is the best performing build. And I was pairing this with the legendary ring, Band of Horn Nightmare, which, you know, is the Hand of Gul'dan legendary. Now, this is a really good spec. However, I was really interested in trying out Balespiders, which is the legendary that gives our Shadowbolt a buff applied to us, giving our Demonbolt extra damage. So we ended up coming up with another build, and I wanted to show you guys this build in case you maybe don't like this demonic consumption build, because it is pretty clunky regarding the 2-minute cooldown on your Felguard, and then the 1.5-minute cooldown on your Tyrant, and then the 45-second cooldown on Vile Fiend, which if you're playing Necro, you also have a 45-second cooldown on Decimating Bolt. So there's some kind of clunkiness and lack of synergy when you're playing the demonic consumption setup. So I wanted to see if I can find an alternative. And this seems to actually be performing pretty well. I'm going to try this out in Raid, and we'll see how it goes. But this is a build that is definitely viable and is just a different way of playing Demonology if you don't want to play this demonic consumption type setup. Now, I'm running Inner Demons here, and Soul Conduit might be a talent that you guys think is probably pretty good or you might want to run. My only issue with Soul Conduit is that if you can have scenarios, I've tested this, where you basically say you have 5 shards and you use a Hand of Gul'dan to get down to 2 shards, and you cast a Demonbolt right off of the back of that, you can actually overcap shards. So when you cast a Hand of Gul'dan, if you get 2 of those shards, proc Soul Conduit, and you cast a Demonbolt, you actually you net positive 1 shard from that combo. Which means if you cast that combo when you're at 5 shards, you're basically overcapping. So you're kind of losing value from this, if that makes sense. So I actually prefer Inner Demons on this row for that reason. You can definitely still play Soul Conduit, but you end up wanting to basically sit at 3 shards and not full cap on shards, because you can overcap if you do it. Hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of confusing, but I played with this a lot, and I think this conceptually is really cool, but it really forces you to have to try and play around 3 shards rather than playing around 5 shards, which to me I just don't like as much, but both of these are fine. The DPS difference between them is really negligible, so if you really like Soul Conduit, go for it, but that's why I'm not running it. Now on the bottom row here, I run Sacrifice Souls. This is actually not good from a burst perspective, but it is a pretty solid increase from a just sustained DPS perspective. Now, it's hard to say. I haven't tested this, like I said, in a raid environment, so we'll have to see how this, does in a raid situation. You can definitely still run demonic consumption here. You're going to have higher highs and lower lows. You're going to spike harder during your Tyrant, and you're going to have a little bit lower DPS in between Tyrants. So it's up to you. You can kind of meet in the middle on some of this stuff and basically run the consumption build with just not Grimoire Felguard and Balespiders, and you can do that as well. These are all going to be really close. All the testing I've done between all these different combinations, you're within a couple hundred DPS between all of them. It's not game breaking one way or another. They're just very different in playstyle and different in their strengths and weaknesses. The demonic consumption build will spike you the highest. You'll get the most burst from that build in like a 30-second window. You'll do a ton of damage, but you're going to have a really low DPS by comparison in between those 2-minute windows. So again, it's up to you. There's going to be times where certain builds are just better on certain fights, and it's going to be a lot of up to your play style. But I wanted to give you guys an alternative, a build that I think is really synergistic and has been a lot of fun to play. And so that's what we're doing here. So now, last thing to mention here is conduits. Now, like I said, we're Necrolord, so I'm using Emini. I know this is a little bit cut off for you guys. I'm sorry about that. I play on an ultra wide monitor and I can't change that. But the lead by example here, giving our Decimating Bolt a little bit of an int buff when we cast it. And then I'm running Tyrant Soul. You can also run Born of Blood. Both of these are very good. You're not going to really notice DPS difference one way or the other. They're just different. This is going to give you a little bit of a stronger window during your Tyrant, and this is going to give you a little bit more consistency regarding those procs. Both are totally fine, and if you prefer one over the other, just run that. But I've been trying to mess with Tyrant Soul because we end up having a good chunk of our damage from our imps, which directly is affected by this conduit, Tyrant Soul conduit, and so that's kind of what I've been trying to play around a little bit and mess with. Now, with this build, we basically are going into our Tyrant with our Dreadstalkers, Vile Fiend up, and ideally 1 3-shard Hand of Gul'dan. So we'll have 3 Imps up as well, not counting these little guys that are just the random guys spawning. We have our Vile Fiend and our Decimating Bolt are both on a 45-second cooldown. So I basically pair those up one time in between the next, until the next Tyrant. So we're going to have one Vile Fiend Decimating Bolt kind of combo in the middle. And then the next one, we're basically going to make sure we match up our Tyrant, Dreadstalkers, Vile Fiend, and Decimating Bolt for like a second power window. And you kind of just rinse and repeat that back and forth. The thing that I like about this build is it's really all of the timing of all your cooldowns is really, really synergistic, and it doesn't feel like you're having to hold anything for too long to like really utilize it well. Now, since we're not running demonic consumption, you don't necessarily have to hold these things. You can kind of use them more on cooldown if you want. It's up to you, but just that's kind of the play style that we're playing with. And if you do end up running the demonic consumption, pairing these things up the way I am with this kind of rotation will be the most effective way of DPSing with this build. So we're open up here. I'm going to use 2 Shadow Bolts here in the opener in hopes of getting a Demonic Calling proc. We're not going to. I'm going to build up to, oh, we just got one right there. I'm going to get one more Hand of Gul'dan out since we did get that proc. And then I'm going to Tyrant here. Now we're going to pop our Trinket on use stuff, all that good stuff. Dump a few shards. Decimating Bolt, and I am going to Demonic Strength right there. Now we're going to Shadow Bolt just to maintain our buff. Shadow Bolt hand. Shadow Bolt hand. Then we're going to build some Shadow Bolts up and get ready here for our Dreadstalkers again. Now, one thing to mention here is you do want to be really ready for these demonic core procs. You'll see we'll start getting a bunch here in a row because of the timing of our 2 Dreadstalkers being kind of back to back. So you need to be ready and aware that when you're running this build, you're going to get like 6 to 8 demonic core procs pretty close together. So you have to kind of be ready and aware. And if you're doing a fight or some kind of content that's not catered towards being able to dump those procs, you're going to lose a good chunk of DPS with not being able to do that. But you see there, now we got our Vile Fiend back up, Decimating Bolts back up again. So this is kind of bridging the gap so we're not losing too much DPS in those windows. Now I need to get a Shadow Bolt off here, so we're going to hand into Shadow Bolt to maintain our Balespider's buff, which you can see right here. And I'm not going to Demonic Strength again just because it is cleave in this. So all the tests I've done comparing all these builds were on these same target dummies. So the cleave that I'm getting on these 2, which is a little bit deceiving, but our Felguard's not very much of our damage, so it's not a big deal. But you see we end up kind of maintaining around this 2700. This is the lowest point really of our whole rotation. This 2700 is about as low as we get from a DPS perspective. Now, going into our second burst window here, we basically want to be dumping shards. And then we have our Dreadstalkers coming up. Vile Fiend's already up. Tyrant again. And we do it all over again. Demonic Strength. We're going to actually, we dropped our Balespiders there because I wasn't paying attention. But you get the point, right? You kind of just can rinse and repeat this process back and forth. And you're basically playing around these really clean 1.5-minute power spike windows off your Tyrant. And everything just goes together very well with this build. So you can see here we're sitting, this has been, 3 minutes now? We're sitting at 3k DPS with no flask, no imp potions, no bloodlust, nothing like that. So this is a pretty solid, just sustainable number with this build. And if you have maybe some better trinkets, you can, even be holding a little bit higher than this. But I want to go ahead and make this to kind of show you guys an alternative to a build. If you've gotten unlucky with, whatever, getting any of your other legendaries or whatever, this is a fun build. This is a good alternative. Last thing to mention here is you can also run from the shadows. This is a little bit higher skill cap, I would say, because it requires you to be ready to dump your demon bolts every time when you have this debuff on the target. You want to be dumping the demon bolts into this debuff, and it can get a little bit tricky doing that effectively, and maintaining the Balespider's legendary buff can be a little bit tough. But that's another option as well that's going to do very good. I've tried both, and the DPS difference between the 2 setups didn't seem very different at all. So I would just pick whatever you want when it comes to that. But both are going to basically net pretty close to the same amount of DPS, at least in my experience so far. So hopefully you guys find this helpful. Let me know if you guys tried this build out at all, if you guys have had fun with it. I'm curious to test this out. I think this will do good in Mythic Plus situations because I think we'll probably be able to get some pretty fast, good, quick implosions with this setup as well. and being able to use our Tyrant every minute and a half and not be trying to hold it for Grimoire, I think is going to feel really nice in some of that Mythic Plus content, where we're basically using our Tyrant to stack as many imps as we can. So we'll see. Let me know. I really want to know what you guys have been having success with down below, what builds, legendaries, things like that. Leave them down below so we can all kind of use this as a working guide, trying to figure out some builds here going into this raid tier. Thanks so much for hanging out, guys. I do appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.